punk end of the 70s came a phenomenon which put a bomb under the world of the British comic strip.
Who the fuck are you looking at?
Viz was crude. Viz was rude.
This fucking big twat above a castle, slap bang shot in the middle of bastard Windsor.
And Viz was lewd.
What we wanted to do was the thing that we always did in Viz, which was to take that bizarre comic world, that British comic world, and put the real world into it.
Viz was part of a comics uprising which saw the clean-cut heroes of the past pushed aside by punky anti-heroes like Tank Girl and Judge Dredd.
Dredd was a fascist. One of today's fascists projected into the future and given a costume and a big gun and the ability to enforce the law, whether he believed in the law or not.
Out of turbulent times emerged a new generation of artists with a taste for anarchy and subversion. Among them Alan Moore, who used the comic strip to explore the political landscape.
Anarchy wears two faces, both creator and destroyer.
Moore also wanted comics to embrace adult themes with X-rated material for adult readers. With this comics new wave came a cult status and the birth of the graphic novel.
There's absolutely no reason why a comic book or a graphic novel cannot be just as rich, just as deep, just as sophisticated, just as emotionally affecting as any novel, as any movie, as any piece of music.
Finally, the British comic strip could be celebrated as a serious art form. It was in 1979 when Viz first unleashed its outrageous brand of humour. From the beginning, Viz poked fun at the traditional British comic. They had a very different kind of boy in a stripy jumper.
Johnny Fartpants, as far as I know, is not a satire of an existing kind of person. It's not like you read that and go, yeah, that stuck it to all those people that fart all the time. It's also partly about its relationship with the British comics that people of my age grew up on. Really terrible, rubbish DC Thompson, comics with really glib little characters in them. But it's also just absurd. It's gleefully absurd.
When it came to doing his shorts, we decided that he could sort of have grey flannel shorts like a traditional British schoolboy. And we decided that they should be permanently displaying signs of being full of fart gas. So they have a sort of a billowy type carry-on like so.
Johnny Fartpants is funny because he's very much like an old Beano or Dandy character, except he farts. Now, you'd never, ever hear about a fart occurring in the Beano or the Dandy.
And they've often got a word written in them, like toot or quack.
And we don't care.
What's brilliant about Viz is there is a type of comedy common amongst people when they're sitting around in a pub or sitting around at school, which you just think can never be in the real. It can't be on telly, it can't be in a magazine, it can't be in anything, because it's either incredibly cruel or incredibly filthy, or it's got massive amounts of bad language in it.
Viz had all this and more. And it could get away with it because it came from an unexpected place.
Viz came out of the cluttered bedroom of Chris Donald and his brother Simon in Newcastle, on the dole or produced with very limited funds, and with no necessarily great ambitions to become the next huge success, to produce stuff that was funny and wilder and freer than was tolerated in the mainstream press.
What sort of things do you find funny?
What sort of things do you find funny?
Everything.
Whack.
We extract the funny things out of any serious situation.
Like in anything serious, people get so serious that they're just funny, so like, there's something funny in everything.
We take serious things, you know, and make them stupid.
Viz followed Punk's command that you do it yourself.
There's a famous fanzine that came out at the height of punk, Sniffing Glue fanzine. It had a cover, 3 guitar chords on it. Here's one chord, here's another one, now go out and form a band. It was an order to people to get out there and do it. DIY ethos. And Viz was the same. Viz was basically, even though they weren't doing it for political reasons, some kids just sitting in a room and making their own comic up. So it was fanzine culture that really gave us Viz.
All the people in the arts, the whole sort of bohemian set of Newcastle all hung around together. And that whole ethos that you would just do it for yourself, you didn't need corporate involvement, was very much part of that.
Funnily enough, it was supposed to be an anti-student magazine, but it became very popular among the students. We didn't like students. Students were sort of very privileged as far as we could tell, and they got all the girlfriends as well, the bastards.
Well, I think by setting everything in Newcastle, they just wrote about what they know, and they were able to give it an authentic voice. But it's also one of the charming things about it is, even a quarter of a century plus on, you can feel its roots.
You know, as teenagers, we were extremely sarcastic people, and our take on things was always to put something down really before thinking about it, and then maybe you would work your way around to thinking that something maybe wasn't as bad as you'd first thought, but our automatic reaction was always to take the piss.
Favourite sex positions of the TV sports commentators. Number 54, Dickie Davis, the wheelbarrow.
Viz gleefully satirised the tabloid press and the curious advice offered by readers' letters.
Amaze your family. Secretly make a pretend candle out of a banana and an almond, then watch their faces as you eat it. T. Atac, Pontefract.
Keep a tin of red paint in your car. If you see a motor accident, you can then pour it over yourself and pretend to be involved.
Don't waste money buying expensive binoculars. Simply stand closer to the object you wish to view.
We used our sense of humour to cope with some of the darker things that were around, because Tynesyde's a brilliant society, but like a lot of great cities, it's got a real sort of dark side to it. And it's certainly in the 70s as well, there used to be a lot of street violence and drunkenness and so on.
The old playful menaces from the Beano were twisted to create Biffa Bacon, where tough love meant a smack in the face.
Away, Biffa, we're going for some fish and chips. Fish and chips 3 times, pal. Aye, with plenty of fucking chips. An extra batter on mine.
Certainly, sir.
Hey, I love fish and chips, me.
Biffa Bacon and his family. And I actually, when I read that, I actually think, oh, I wish his mum and dad would be nice to him. Where is the chink of light where they're not hitting him or doing something horrible to him? Because, you know, like the Simpsons and that, there are still those redeeming moments for Homer and all that. You never get that. Viz is so hardcore relentless. It doesn't let you have any sentimentality at all.
There you are, that's £4.5.
Hey, it looks fucking lovely, father. Cheers, pal. Oh, hey, it smells good now. Aye, Biffa, this one's yours, son. I do hope you enjoy it.
He started off just being Bully Beef, basically. He was a bloke who went round, but instead of Bully Beef sort of punching people in stars, going around their head for a minute and then getting a bump on their head, it was like a proper sort of hooligan who'd throw a brick at you instead.
I mean, you just put this in my hand, and I just sentences on the front. Everything about it is brilliant.
What Viz loved more than anything was honest-to-goodness effing and blinding, gloriously immortalised by Roger Melly.
They are championing the fact that swearing is often very, very funny. It's amused generations, certainly of males, for all through my life. At school, in the factory, in the green room, in wherever you are. Once you get to that level where you start talking like that, it's a fabulous bonding experience, and I think it's in most people. And I love the way Viz is unashamed about it.
Hello everyone and welcome. Today I'm reporting from this here sod of a castle. Cut. What's the problem then, Tom? We can't use sod, can we, Sheila? No sodding. Okay, no problem. Can we get on with it then?
The whole swearing thing was very edgy at the time, and I would compare it to smoking pot at the time. It was very dangerous, you know, because you couldn't buy magazines, apart from pornography, you couldn't buy magazines that had swearing in. And we just started putting swearing in our magazines because they were for our friends down at the pub, you know.
Cue sound, right out, stand by, rolling, take 3. Hello and welcome to the programme. Today I'm speaking to you from this great big bugger of a castle here in Cut. Look, Roger, I can't see any of this sod or bugger bit in the script. Can you leave it out? This is kids' TV, Roger.
We sort of accidentally had this ability to put schoolboy humour, to put street humour onto paper. And we did it and so obviously the swearing went in there quite naturally. And a lot of people think we did it to shock and all the rest of it, but we didn't. It was just our sense of humour. And all we did was we put our sense of humour on paper and sold it down the pub.
Stand by, take 4. Hello and welcome. Today I'm reporting from Windsor. Great, super. This fucking great big twatter of a castle, slap bang sod in the bastard middle of Windsor.
Whilst the Donald brothers laughed at the world from their Newcastle bedroom, another group of young artists and writers were working on their own comics uprising. But this came from within the comics establishment, the London headquarters of publishing giant IPC. Action may have looked like a traditional comic, but its writers used every page to challenge lazy stereotypes of the past, turning comics convention upside down.
The premise behind Action was that everything should be different and fresh. So I would have a working class secret agent, not the usual guy from Eton and Oxford. I would have a German hero and a black boxer. Now, it didn't seem to me anything that big a deal about having a black boxer, but believe me, in 1975, 1976, that was a very unusual idea.
A strip like Blackjack turned outsiders into heroes, subverting the traditional way characters behaved in comics.
The characters were aggressive, they weren't passive, they weren't clean-cut, they were tough.
For the first time, a comic was full of realistic plot lines with tough, edgy characters intent on fighting authority. There were no more heroes anymore, just anti-heroes for a punk generation.
I think we actually called ourselves a comic of the streets. We were not a comic designed for middle-class kids, for parents and teachers to approve of. We didn't want their approval. Action was inevitably a comic that would be confiscated.
Action tapped into a feeling of discontent amongst British youth. One notorious strip drew on the rise of football hooliganism to create Look Out for Lefty, about a bad boy footballer from the wrong side of the tracks. This gritty approach to the story struck a chord with teenage readers who recognised the world Action portrayed. But the oldies hated it, and there was outrage that strips like this could show violence on and off the pitch with such graphic intensity. Moral panic was now fueled by a media campaign demanding that something be done to silence this threat to the nation.
Very unfortunately, there was a cover which features a guy on the ground, a civilian, and nearby is a policeman's helmet, which doesn't belong to him, but the colourist painted it all blue, so it looks like this policeman has fallen down at the hands of a thug, and that was the cover that got Action banned.
Under mounting pressure, eventually IPC closed Action altogether. But co-founder Pat Mills was determined to continue creating characters that would provoke a reaction. To realise his vision, his next project sent punks into space.
2000 AD was very much a retreat from reality. In other words, we were getting so many problems on Action. Everybody was after us. There was lots of media problems and so on. And I realized that if you have stories set in the future or in a science fiction world, you're going to get a lot less problems. So we really, 2000 AD was Action with a science fiction veneer.
We could say these aren't human beings blowing up, they're cyborgs. They look like human beings. They have all kinds of bits of fleshy stuff spiralling out of them, but it's kind of synthy flesh. It's not real.
2000 AD was launched to coincide with the hype surrounding the release of Star Wars. But where the Hollywood blockbuster was good, clean family fun, 2000 AD was loved by its teenage readers for its darker attitude.
You felt like it belonged to you and was from your culture. It was a British comic that felt contemporary and relevant.
Writers and artists on 2000 AD had grown up under the influence of American comics and the underground comics scene of the late 60s. This love of Americana and a taste for subversion defined the spirit of 2000 AD. One character has ensured 2000 AD a revered place in British comics history: Judge Dredd.
What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law.
Dredd was a fascist. One of today's fascists projected into the future and given a costume and a big gun and the ability to enforce the law, whether he believed in the law or not.
Judge Dredd ruthlessly patrolled Mega City 1, a sprawling, futuristic urban jungle inhabited by a violent criminal underworld.
Dredd is the ultimate policeman. He's there to do a job, he's not there to comment on it, he's not there to like things or not like things. He's there to enforce the law. And if you break the law, you pay whatever penalty Judge Dredd thinks is correct for you.
It was Spanish artist Carlos Esquerra who was given the job of designing the original look of Judge Dredd.
An artist is like a filter, but you are not conscious always, about what you are doing in that moment. And then you reflected that in your comics, in your drawings, but without realizing even what are you doing.
Esquerra's vision of Dredd was inspired by growing up with the experience of fascism under General Franco. The symbol of fascist power in Spain was the eagle. This was deliberately used by the artist in the conception of his anti-hero. A second inspired idea that gave Dredd iconic status was the decision that he would always remain hidden behind his helmet.
At least for me, it was a way to do it more impersonal. Because if you show a face, especially if you show eyes, they can show emotions. As with the eyes blacked, it's not emotional. It's practically, it can be anything, a machine.
I mean, visually it was incredibly stylish. He looked extraordinary, the black leather thing, the chains, it's kind of bondage gear, really. Very unusual for a British comic.
This guy was so over the top, it was unbelievable. And not everybody liked the look of him because he was so weird and so crazy. But it was obvious to me that this guy just looked astonishing. His motorbike, I'd never seen anything like it. So it was very, very exciting.
Judge Dredd was an immediate hit with readers. But what transformed 2000 AD into a cult was the introduction of Tharg, the comic's very own alien agony uncle, always ready with an answer to any tricky question.
Dear Tharg, it appears to my trained eye that the Gronk comes from the planet Blas in the Galago system, correct? Now, isn't it also strange that there is a famous artist called Blas Galago? Explain, please. Earthlet Peter Nigel Briggs, Prescott.
Explain what, Earthlet Peter? That one of your planet's artists was inspired enough by a planet full of Gronks to name himself after it? I am becoming used to some of the strange ways of your world.
What built up over the course of the comic was a dialogue between the readers, a lot of response, illustrations, feedback, and also a whole language, words like Zarjaz and Skrotnig and Drok, for example, which of course was definitely the disguised word for another four-letter word, which enabled characters to swear, meant that there was a kind of secret code, a language that could be used in everyday life. So now readers were actually able to speak in the language of Tharg and become part of that community.
They put a call out in the first year to draw what you thought the deputy editor of the magazine would look like. Again, you knew what the editor looked like, but what did the deputy editor look like? So you were invited to send in pictures, which is a very Blue Peter thing to do, because it's 2000 AD, it was cool. So I sent one in, I sent a drawing in, and I got a letter basically telling me that my drawing was going to be in 2000 AD. And this letter, with my name on it and my address typed on there, came from Tharg. And it says, Borag Thung, Earthlet, thank you for sending your contribution to 2000 AD. To the Nerve Centre. I've been able to use it in Programme 25, which was issue 25. That's the issue. And at the back, there's a whole selection of drawings of the deputy editor. And mine is there. They've kind of redrawn the reader's drawings. And my name is on there. I mean, I couldn't believe it. My name's in 2000 AD. I kept that, and I've still got it. So that's how much it meant to me.
Into the 80s, as social unrest spread across British cities, comics began to reflect a bleaker and more pessimistic climate. Instead of 2000 AD's science fiction fantasy and humour for teenagers, a new kind of strip emerged, angrier and political, more grown up. One writer seized in this mood to write a bitter satire on Margaret Thatcher's Britain.
Margaret Thatcher had made a disaster of the first 2 or 3 years of her premiership. Everybody hated her.
Government and Parliament can make the law. Police and courts can uphold the law. But a free society will only survive if we, its citizens, obey the law.
The early 80s was a time of riot, a time of strikes, a time of extremism. There was fear of civil breakdown, fear of a police state.
This struck me as potentially a very interesting backdrop for this future world that I was going to be talking about, because as with most of the future worlds in science fiction, you're not talking about the future. You're talking about the present.
Moe's political vision was expressed in V for Vendetta, a strip that was first published in Warrior. Warrior was a new independent which broke with comics industry practice by giving its writers and artists rights to their own work. In such a supportive environment, Moe, with artist David Lloyd, created a Britain in the grip of fascist dictatorship. The strip featured V, a freedom fighter with a burning desire to build a better world through a campaign of destruction.
Anarchy wears two faces, both creator and destroyer. Thus, destroyers topple empires, make a canvas of clean rubble where creators can then build a better world. Rubble, once achieved, makes further ruins means irrelevant. Away with our explosives then. Away with our destroyers. They have no place within our better world. But let us raise a toast to all our bombers, all our bastards, most unlovely and most unforgivable. Let's drink their health. Then meet with them no more.
The look of V was inspired by one of the most notorious rebels against the British state, Guy Fawkes.
V, wants to celebrate this character that the English establishment made a villain out of. So it's a celebration of somebody who was a villain and we made into a hero.
There was something so British and so striking about that iconic image.
The personal journey which had led Alan Moore to V for Vendetta began in the counterculture of the 60s. By the 80s, he had a distinctive political ideology to express through his writing.
I was already starting to see this strip as being a kind of an examination of what I saw as the two poles of human politics. Anarchy and fascism. One, anarchy is taking responsibility for your political life entirely onto yourself. Fascism is the absolute abdication of that responsibility. It is subsuming yourself, submerging yourself within a group.
The story of V begins when, as one of hundreds of prisoners, he is subjected to medical tests. V is being held in a concentration camp, part of a network of repression set up after a fascist coup d'etat. The tests, however, give him superhuman powers that allow him to make a dramatic escape. V then vows to hunt down the leaders of the coup, the church, police and media which support it, and bring power back to the people. V for Vendetta signalled a new level of sophistication and ambition in British comics.
What was most impressive about V for Vendetta was how politically sussed the writer obviously was.
To complement the strip's dystopian view of the future, the artwork took inspiration from film noir. A decision was also made to do away with traditional comics devices such as thought balloons and sound effects. All this aimed at a new adult readership.
The idea of getting rid of thought balloons and sound effects was motivated by me wanting to get people to read comics who didn't normally read comics. Because one of the things that often puts people off is the, bam, pow, zap stuff. Everybody knows that when a gun goes off, it goes bang. So you don't actually need to tell them. Not if they're intelligent adults, And thought balloons were an artificiality that you don't get in any other kind of entertainment.
I think that one of the things Alan Moore is very good at doing, which is why he may be an evil magician of another dimension and should be treated with suspicion, is he seems to be very good at intuiting cultural trends and where things are going.
At the same time that Alan Moore was bringing political satire to the comic strip, the most controversial music scene since punk inspired another independent comic, Deadline.
Deadline arriving in 1988 was like 2000 AD arriving in 1977. It was bang in the middle of a new musical and cultural era. The acid house scene was beyond just a scene because the tabloids had picked up on it and said, our young people are running around taking drugs and dancing all night illegally in fields. We must stop this. And so it was absolutely everywhere.
Deadline, we were trying to make it a pop comic. Mass market pop comic is what we wanted. And also a bridge between journalism and comics.
It's a comic, but it also has bands in it. It was almost like a music magazine, but it had comic strips in it. And at the same time, the NME, which was obviously a music paper, had comic strips as well, and had little cartoons of smileys and stuff in it. So there was a lot of crossover between the NME and Deadline.
Deadline introduced comics' first female anti-hero. Tank Girl was Minnie the Minx for clubbers. Deadline's cover girl with a difference.
Tank Girl as a character was dissolute, punky, not remotely straight arrow. She smoked, she drank, she took drugs, she wore not a lot, she slept with a kangaroo.
It went down very well with the ladies in Camden, basically. All these kind of freaks that lived in Camden, all these girls that had nowhere to go, wanted something to do, all started shaving their heads and dressing up. So, and we had Tank Girl lookalike competitions all the time. and they would drive. There'd be loads of these tank girls. They came from all over the place. The plots weren't particularly marvellous plots. It was just more a vehicle for Tank Girl blowing things up and shooting people. And she even got the better of the devil in one of them. I think she sent the devil to hell. This holiest of bathroads holds the secrets to life, death, microwave cooking, and the secret of the universe. Tank Girl, it also makes me a dirt cheap boob tube. Ninja 1. Oh, she's destroying the gown. Ninja 2. Stop it. No, don't. Oh dear, screw me. Little picture at the bottom saying more beer, splash it all over your body.
If Tank Girl was a role model for hip girls in the London club scene, then in Newcastle, Viz was going from strength to strength by creating even more unlikely heroines. Viz's most popular strip was inspired by the fun-loving lassies the artist saw at play in the clubs and pubs of their hometown.
My reaction to the fat slags was actually one of enthusiasm at the time, as I was at that point fairly chunky myself, and I'm from the northeast. And you would have thought that I would assume it was offensive and problematic, but they were people I recognised, and I was actually quite excited by them. I thought they were terrific. You can read them as terribly negative stereotypes, or you can see them as women who do what they want, when they want, with whom they want, in any way they want, and that everyone needs to be frightened of them. Now that's actually quite empowering. These are true characters. There's a place in Newcastle called the Big Market, where if you go down there on a Friday night or a Saturday night, you will see people wearing similarly small amounts of clothing on similarly sized bodies, and smaller and larger. They are there, they're real.
It doesn't really denigrate these women for being fat, alcoholic nymphomaniacs, right? It says this is a choice they've made, and look at the fun they're having, and wouldn't you want to be in their Hogarthian lifestyle? It looks superb.
The humour that Viz explored was in stark contrast to an emerging comedy scene carefully attuned to political correctness.
The alternative comedy that went on at the time, although it was great and it produced some fantastic acts and some fantastic material, the whole politically correct aspect of it was worthless as far as I'm concerned. It was, you see, comedy can't be righteous. Comedy doesn't bear analysis. Whatever makes you laugh, and you can't be judgmental about it.
And Ben Elton would be on television, and he would basically tell you how to think, and it would be anti-Thatcher, and it would be pro-equality, and anti-sexism, and anti-racism, and this was so persuasive. I, for one, would sit down every week, and it would be like he would be a preacher.
Seriously, it's not exactly an aphrodisiac, is it, that little rubber pudding basin? Every woman who ever had a cap always thought, it's not going to affect my sex life. I'm going to put it in every night, whether we make love or not. Oh, yeah. By the second night, you're going, oh, God, do we have to then? No, I don't want to put me cap in. Oh, all right. There you go, leg up again, wrestling it up. I've been there. I'm a bit of a new man. I've tried to be involved. I've caught a few as they shoot across. Oh, yeah, Peter Shilton, me. I mean, that's how they ought to train goalkeepers. I mean, they'd give a whole new meaning to the term capped for England, wouldn't they?
And it was like a rallying cry. And this was such an orthodoxy that for Viz to come along and basically be sexist or celebrate sexism or allow us to laugh at sexism and to have militant in there and the fat slags, this was so naughty and so wrong. And you can imagine, you know, Chris Donald and Simon Donald sitting up there in Newcastle and watching Ben Elton and going, God, this is what they do in London, is it? This is what happens in London.
Viz became even more popular by allowing readers to laugh at characters who revealed the absurdities of the righteous left, the militant feminist Millie Tant, and the ultra-liberal modern parents.
Have you ever been fox hunting? Have you ever worn fur? Have you ever had misogynist fantasies whilst masturbating?
For Viz, anyone was fair game. Even the desperate antics of their friends was parodied in another hit character, Sid the Sexist.
He was supposed to be this sort of Geordie character who was useless around women, but felt that he had to do all of the bravado and all the macho stuff that peer pressure told him he had to. Making him a Geordie was obvious to us, though. I mean, that was just how we saw it, because that was what was there around us. I decided to make his hair because it was in the early 80s, the big thing at the time amongst sort of people who really weren't very cool or trendy was the bubble perm. Sid is arriving at his local newsagent's, and he goes in and he's sheepishly looking at the porn magazines on the top shelf. He grabs one. Oh, 20 Benson.
That's 128 altogether. Shite. There's a last serving. Anna, this'll do the trick. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow, Sheila. Ta-ra!
Ooh! Ooh, yeah!
Sorry, love, these must be yours.
The clever trick that I did was I turned the Fred Perry logo into a cock, which I thought was very funny at the time. This porn mag, mine? I thought you meant the newspaper. I porn, me.
Well, I'll believe you, mind. I don't suppose anyone would admit to buying big jugs monthly.
Big jugs? Oh, it was Mammoth Melons I wanted. I've picked up the wrong one. Sid isn't complete without his comedy catchphrase.
Ding dong.
Oh, Mrs. Smut, is your Sydney in?
Aye, lads. He's in his bedroom, just gone up.
Sid's bound to be grooming his cell for a night out with some dirty lasses.
Aye?
Aye.
Well, any taboo subject, when broken, is a beautiful thing in a way. Even if you don't agree with what the actual sentiment is, it's so fabulous that someone is... It wasn't the fact that they rebelled against political correctness in Fizz, so much as they didn't really acknowledge that it existed almost. They were just free. It had a beautiful freedom about it.
The phenomenal popularity of the Fat Slags and Sid the Sexist sent sales of Viz over 1 million.
Went out and bought a packet of fig rolls and took a photograph in the office of us having tea and fig rolls to celebrate. It was really difficult to take in because life didn't change for us. We were still working in the same pokey little office and still producing the same stuff. And these were just figures. They were just like numbers that came in saying, oh, you've sold this many, you've sold that many.
For a decade, the British comics industry had been given new life by the humour of Viz and the wit and invention found in 2000 AD, Warrior and Deadline. Their success in suggesting new possibilities for the comic strip attracted the interest of big American publishers. By the mid-80s, leading British writers and artists were being lured across the Atlantic to bring their inventive talents to play in a new creative environment.
Americans came headhunting and they discovered the wealth of talent that we have here. As a result, there was a fairly substantial exodus of talent across the Atlantic.
One of the first to join this new British invasion was Alan Moore. His taste for subversion now turned the American comics tradition of the superhero upside down when he took hallowed characters like Batman and Superman and transported them to a whole new place, creating a dark tale of corruption. Watchmen.
We were able to sort of take these genre standards and give them a kind of real-world twist.
What Alan and I wanted to do was to ask the question, if these characters were real, what would they really be like? Why would you put on a costume? Why would you want to go out and fight crime? What would be the kind of motives? What would happen if you were gifted with superpowers? How would you behave? So we were actually using the plot to explore the different facets of what it meant to be a superhero.
In Watchmen, I think Alan Moore looked at everything that had been subtext in the iconic American superheroes, like the kind of egomania of Superman as this all-powerful being, and the kind of suggested sort of slight sexual deviance, slight discomfort in his own skin of a character like Batman, and also of the fact that he's a sort of self-appointed, almost kind of fascist vigilante.
The Watchmen were superhero vigilantes employed by the American government to do dirty work for the state. They led desperate and melancholic lives full of confusion and moral decay.
I wanted to create characters that had got moral ambiguities, that weren't perfect, one-dimensional, he's the good guy, he's the bad guy.
One of the most tortured characters in Watchmen is Rorschach, a kind of Batman dressed like a detective from 50s pulp fiction. His experience of fighting bad guys has turned him into a paranoid egomaniac.
Rorschach's Journal, October 16th, 1985. 42nd Street women's breasts draped across every billboard, every display littering the sidewalk. Was offered Swedish love and French love, but not American love. American love like Coke in green glass bottles, they don't make it anymore. Thought about Moloch's story on the way to cemetery. Could all be lies? Could all be part of revenge scheme planned during his decade behind bars? But if true, then what? Puzzling reference to an island, also to Dr. Manhattan. Might he be at risk in some way? So many questions. Never mind. Answer soon. Nothing is insoluble. Nothing is hopeless. Not while there's life.
And a trench coat, collar turned up in best Hollywood tradition. Now, Rorschach doesn't have a face. He's got this mask on, which has got a kind of a moving series of black blobs on it, so that you can have whatever fearful images in your head appear by reading into it whatever you like.
A person dressing in a mask and going around beating up criminals is a vigilante psychopath. That's what Batman is, in essence. And we came up with the character of Rorschach as a way of exploring what that Batman-type driven, vengeance-fueled vigilante would be like in the real world. And the short answer is a nutcase. In the cemetery, all the white crosses stood in rows, neat chalk marks on a giant scorecard. Paid last respects quietly, without fuss. Edward Morgan Blake, born 1924, 45 years, a comedian, died 1985, buried in the rain. Is that what happens to us? A life of conflict with no time for friends. So that when it's done, only our enemies leave flowers. Violent lives ending violently. Dollar Bill, the silhouette, Captain Metropolis. We never die in bed. Not allowed.
Alan has an uncanny knack of seeing right into the essence of a hero or of a villain, and then expanding on it in ways that nobody else had thought about before. And consequently, Alan's stories, compared to most of the stories that went before them, are totally off the wall, and they achieve a depth that very few comic stories achieve.
Something in our personalities, perhaps. Some animal urge to fight and struggle, making us what we are. Unimportant. We do what we have to do. Others bury their heads between the swollen teats of indulgence and gratification, piglets
squirming beneath a selfish shelter. But there is no shelter, and the future is bearing down like an express train.
It was an immensely impressive piece of work, and at that time there wasn't anything in mainstream American comics which was done like that.
Heard joke once. Man goes to doctor, says he's depressed, says life seems harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go and see him. I should pick you up. Man bursts into tears. Says, but doctor, I am Pagliacci.
British comics people were now creating work which could travel, which would be able to impress the Europeans and the Americans. And that was, to me, where British comics came of age.
The success of Watchmen was part of a wider international phenomenon taking comics into a new era. First published monthly, Watchmen was re-released as one complete work, what we would now call a graphic novel.
Watchmen is a graphic novel because it fulfills what I think would be the criteria, which is that it's complete in itself, that it's a narrative that, you know, has a direction, has a conclusion, if not something as simple as a beginning, a middle and an end. And it's something that, you know, has some kind of depth other than just being a rollicking adventure yarn. And there are two ways of coming at the graphic novel. You can either do essentially a part work, which is what Watchmen was, and I suppose the model for that is kind of Charles Dickens. If you think of Dickens' novels, they're actually collections of weekly episodes, often done, as Watchmen occasionally was, under great time pressure. Or you can approach it from the point of view of conceiving it as a longer form, a 200-page, 300-page story.
Over the next 20 years, numerous groundbreaking strips would be published in the graphic novel format. These have dealt with serious and adult subjects from the Holocaust to life in modern Iran and Palestine.
It's an entire medium that has come of age because of the format, which allows it the distribution through bookshops. And suddenly we're seeing that graphic novels are appearing on the top sales lists of the broadsheet newspapers, both in Britain and America, and they're making an impact. They're being discussed on the book programme. It's great, it's great. It's just a shame it took so long to get here.
We have now, in the 21st century, a library, a real library of substantial graphic novels that can be can set up strongly against the best that's going on in other narrative forms, whether film or literature or plays.
Today, a work like Alice in Sunderland by Brian Talbot demonstrates a confidence that the graphic novel can combine complex storytelling with bravura artwork.
Alice in Sunderland is a brilliant evocation of both the life stories of Alice Liddell, the model for Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, but also a historical review of his hometown, Sunderland, and how the magic and mythology of these characters continues and interweaves.
Alice in Sunderland is just surreal. It's a Terry Gilliam movie as a graphic novel. It's absurd. It goes off on every tangent. There's every art style imaginable in it. It's a gallery of contemporary art styles of the past with a narrative that holds it all together. It's absolutely revolutionary. And the beauty is it's one person's vision.
To give a narrative backbone to this multi-layered work, Brian Talbot took inspiration from an earlier period of British popular culture.
The setting for the book is a performance on the stage of the Sunderland Empire, and that sort of underpins the whole structure of the thing. I mean, there's even an interval in the middle and a grand theatrical finale at the end. And because it's a palace of varieties, this wonderful Edwardian building, I thought I'd make it a variety performance. It's because it's not one story, it's literally dozens and dozens of stories. And so I thought, well, I'll tell each one, I'll change my style according to the story I'm telling. It only actually works as one piece, because lots of things are happening, there's lots of different stories, and they all seem sort of disparate. But as the book progresses, they all sort of start weaving together and becoming more interlinked.
The success of the graphic novel has freed up artists to work in new ways. Without the demands of a weekly strip, Brian Talbot was able to spend 4 years researching the history of Sunderland and experimenting with graphic styles in the book.
Victorian Sunderland is a vibrant and expanding boomtown filled with gracious public buildings and many private streets, such as this, built for the growing middle class, many of them ship owners. There's still dozens of these splendid terraces here in the centre of the city, a testament to its golden age when Sunderland was the biggest shipbuilding port in the world.
The graphic novel is also allowing writers and artists to push the boundaries of just how far the comic strip can go. Alan Moore's Lost Girls explores taboo areas of sexuality and the difficult worlds of erotica and pornography.
I wondered whether it might be possible to do a lengthy extended narrative that was based around nothing other than sex. And it occurred to me that almost every comic book on the stands is an extended narrative about nothing other than violence.
For his latest piece of provocation, Moore collaborated with American underground artist Melinda Gebbie.
We started talking about story ideas, and then we started talking about our general attitudes about pornography and what a disappointment it was. And, I told him about how when I was a kid, my dad used to get Playboy subscriptions, and my mother would bark at him as soon as it came through the door. "You've got 2 weeks to look at this, and then it goes out in the trash." And as a kid, I thought, well, I looked at this, it's just pictures of pretty ladies, what's the problem here, And so I grew up being very curious about adults and their attitudes about pictures and about things about the body.
Lost Girls brings together 3 iconic figures from children's literature and reimagines them as adults, reflecting on their sexual histories. First, there's Alice in Wonderland.
I started to see her as this slightly opium-addled, very graceful, very beautiful, elderly, aristocratic British lesbian. I worked out her sexuality and her sensibilities according to the story that we were starting to create for them, and we built it up from there.
And from Peter Pan, there's Wendy.
I could see Wendy perhaps growing up into a very repressed, middle-class, middle-aged mother who had perhaps had some incredibly torrid sexual experience back in her youth, but that this had frightened her regarding sex, and that she'd tended to put all sexual expression into this shadow world. Again, this was taking the theme of shadows from Peter Pan itself. And she's retreated into a largely sexless marriage with an older man.
Finally, from The Wizard of Oz comes Dorothy.
With Dorothy, she was obviously from a blue-collar working-class background, out there in the farms of the Midwest. So I was quite pleased to have these 3 different ages of women, 3 different body types, and then when I realised that they were actually from 3 different classes, that seemed to add a different layer to the narrative, because you can talk about the class basis of a lot of sexuality and a lot of our sexual thinking.
Who would ever imagine that you could have a comic dealing with such strong adult material, blurring distinctions between erotica and pornography, exploring a marvellously imaginative idea of the heroines of children's novels, Alice, Wendy and Dorothy, as adults, sharing their sexual histories and experiences.
Although Moore researched the traditions of Victorian erotica when writing Lost Girls, admirers of his work worry that his intentions will be misunderstood.
I think what's problematic about Lost Girls is that most of us that read comic books, and in fact the average person, does not carry around in their head a general understanding of what the genre rules of Victorian pornography were. So it's very difficult to tell when you're reading Lost Girls what's Alan Moore and Melinda Gibby and what is the source material. You don't kind of know where it's being stretched. You don't know if you're supposed to appreciate some of the genuine obscenity in it, kind of in inverted commas, or whether it's being cleverly manipulated, or whether it's the source material itself.
Despite the potential for controversy, Alan Moore remains determined to use his work to confirm the comic strip format as a serious art form.
The thing is that once people have actually seen Lost Girls, it's very difficult to argue that it isn't art. The only thing that you can really object to it is, on account of, is if you don't think that sex should be portrayed in literature or films or art in any way.
The key to understanding Lost Girls is Moore's roots in the libertarian counterculture.
I think that Lost Girls asks some really big and difficult questions about the nature of obscenity and the nature of imagination and reality. But I think that it's done from culturally the place that Alan Moore and Melinda Gibby inhabit, which is a different and better place than where we live. They're from the 60s counterculture, and I think they have a very open-hearted people that believe the best of everyone. And I think that they're putting this book out into a world that's much more cynical and suspicious, and I think there are things in it that would panic people because they don't understand the context of where it's come from.
From Lost Girls to Viz to 2000 AD, British comics have reinvented themselves for an older and more knowing readership. A generation of artists and writers have ensured that the comic strip not only survives, but thrives. An art form as vibrant as any in our culture.
Hello, I'm Charlie Brooker, and I've been given 14 seconds to ruin these end credits by promoting Screenwipe, a programme about television full of reviews and reports and complaints about the way TV treats you like an idiot by shrieking about forthcoming shows before the one you're watching is even finished, just like I'm doing now.